love of online learning started early. I was approached by the University of British Columbia close to 20 years ago to start teaching. Then it was continuing education. Now it's through extended learning department at UBC, the University of British Columbia. This was in their certificate for intercultural studies. So I'm a professor in organizational behavior, and I teach as an adjunct at a number of universities, but these days mainly for UBC. So my love of online learning was certainly driven by a desire to see equity in learning opportunities for as wide a group of people as possible. I think that everything I've done in my life has been driven by equity. So online learning dovetailed very nicely with my other very strong passion, which was around diversity, inclusion, and equity in organizations and in society. So as I taught online, I could see the intersection of these two very, very strong areas of interest and experience for myself. Certainly when we started in continuing education, there was an online component. This is 20 years ago, and we would all be mailed these huge binders, right? It was an almost a sort of email thing. Well, of course, in the last 2 decades, learning management systems, that's the online platforms that you use to study, they have changed exponentially. They are fabulous. The interfaces are so user-friendly, very easy to get through, very easy to access what you need. So I think the technological infrastructure around online learning is night and day in its infancy, and nothing compared to what it's going to be. And that's why I find this aspect of education just so continually exciting. There are always new developments. I think that in Canada, we were one of the early movers in online education. Countries like Australia, South Africa were also, because, huge geographic spread. What I've seen over the years is that the equity is, of course, in the access to education for people who would not possibly have the opportunity, either economically or in the busy exigencies of our lives, to travel to a brick and mortar university. So this is really important, and I have loved online learning for that equality and access always. The courses I teach online for the University of British Columbia are, of course, offered globally, and very often my students are in every part of the world, and which is why we use an asynchronous platform, which is, it's not real time. It's not self-paced learning either. These are courses that have been fully designed, the curriculum fully accredited for an online environment. So there's no academic inferiority through online education, none at all. The courses that you are offered online are exactly the courses that would be offered on campus. So the quality is the same or better, I would say, because online curriculum development specialists are a very, very talented and highly trained group. But I think that the ability for a full-time working procurement manager in Singapore to study at a very well-known, prestigious Canadian university, which is the University of British Columbia in my case, that's priceless. Most of the participants, as we call them in online at UBC, most of the participants are full-time working professionals. It would literally not be possible for them to travel to get their education. There's a huge difference in asynchronous and synchronous learning, and I want to make a real distinction here. Because of our COVID times, many more people are studying online than ever did before, but that is a form of remote learning that is not actually traditional asynchronous online education, because that is real-time remote learning. So it's an entirely different thing, and often because And I give so much credit to all educators and students, participants for doing this, for making the transition. It will be temporary. These are not classrooms that have been designed for the online environment. They're not classes that have been. So the real difference is in asynchronous learning, there are very clear instructions of when you should post, when you should respond, what your commitments are. In general, at UBC, we're looking at least 10 to 15 hours per week that people have to commit, and it's quite a lot for full-time working professionals. We're seeing, especially now in COVID times, people, if you have a more traditional family where there's two partners at home working, and there are children who can't go to school as well. I mean, it's been a real challenge, and yet people have still managed to do it. So it is highly doable, and it is also highly structured. So for instance, I can walk you through a typical class if you'd like. What we do is you do your reading generally on weekends. It's structured like that. We assume that most of our participants are full-time working professionals. You do your assignment post on a Sunday. You have Monday and Tuesday to respond to your fellow participants. Then I, as your facilitator, will give you my feedback on the assignment. You have then a day or two to respond to myself, and also continue the discussion with the other online participants. In a cohort on the ones I teach at UBC, it's about seven people. It's a fairly ideal learning environment. And then perhaps a journal post on the Thursday to reflect on your individual personal learning, and then start reading again for the next week. So that it's highly structured, everything's set out. There's no uncertainty. You don't have to worry with a well-designed online classroom because you know exactly when to do everything. If the student support is good, as we are at UBC, they will explain very carefully what the time commitments are and what your work commitments are going to be. Gender participation aspect of online learning has been very interesting, and the vast majority of our of the participants that I see in my classes at UBC are women. And online learning, especially asynchronous learning, really suits a lot of busy working professional women, because they can combine exactly those aspects of their lives that most combining, say between the ages of your mid-20s to your 40s. And so I see it offers a great deal of flexibility. The other aspect for women, and I don't want to get into gender stereotypes, it would be odd coming from me, because as a lifelong, say, inclusion specialist, I think a lot about these things. But in real-time classrooms, I see the intersection of culture, of class, of gender, means that you will hear much more from certain types of students than you will hear from others. So just to give a stereotypical vision, say from a real-time MBA classroom, you would see that many students of Asian ethnicity and particularly Asian women tend to have more introverted behaviors in a public setting like a classroom, and will not be the first ones to offer a comment. Although, of course, their vision is highly valued, and so in the online environment, issues of is English an additional language for you? And I say additional, I don't like second, because English is usually the fourth or fifth language for the brilliant multilingual people who study in English. We have to be very aware of that. Their knowledge and experience is something you need so badly in that classroom. So the online classroom allows people time to draft your response in advance. You can check it for spelling and grammar areas. In the linguistic hegemony that takes over in a classroom setting, in a class setting, usually it's white male extroverts who dominate the conversation. And again, they have a lot to say too, but because there's so much noise around their frequent comments, people tune them out. So the inclusion aspect works both ways. The extrovert actually gets heard, and the introvert can actually participate. It's a remarkable thing. I mean, I've said for years, no one's a dog on the internet. Well, quite frankly, it's true. You can be your best self online in a situation where you're not pressured. Reflective learners, people who really sat to think about things before they respond, they absolutely, by the time they are ready to jump in, the topic has changed in a real-time situation. So for so many reasons, I adore the online environment for being very inclusive and very fair. People aren't limited in the number. In an online environment, the inclusion is multifaceted. So people aren't limited to the number of posts they can post. I mean, absolutely. Of course, the limitation will be, are the other participants that interested in reading them? As a facilitator, of course, I read everything with pleasure. It means the extroverts can and always do post much longer posts and much more frequently than the others. We have a stricter count. A post should be 500 to 700 words. Brevity is a skill. Leaving things out is a skill. So they are going to be constrained slightly by that, perhaps, but then they just post more often as me. So the extrovert can be there, be present, as fully involved as they wish, and so can the introvert. Because when you see these thoughtful, well-constructed posts from people who would perhaps not even have been present, if you can think of this in a real-time situation, I mean, it's magic. So I find the interaction and the understanding on a really very, very important elemental level of these two groups of each other. Because quite frankly, in the real-time classroom situation, in particular with MBA classes where things are highly competitive, you can get a lot of friction between those two groups. The introvert who never feels heard and the extrovert who feels they're constantly being shut up. And none of that happens online. At the moment, there's a lot of confusion to what the definition really is of online education, and particularly when we start to break it into asynchronous or synchronous. So I'll just do the definitions up front. The asynchronous learning means not in real time. So that means that the students are never, at least not by planning, on the platform at the same time. The online environment that you'll use for asynchronous is called a learning management system, and there are so many examples of this now. There are beautiful, beautiful systems everywhere for use. What we don't tend to use at all is any form of real-time instruction. So there's no point in the course where people have to log on at the same time around the world because of time differences, because of the exigent people's lives. They simply can't. So asynchronous means that you are enrolled in the course, you log on to the course is all there, but it's not learning. And that's another big mistake that people make about asynchronous learning. They say, okay, you can do it whenever you want. Well, no, you can't. As I've outlined, there's a whole course structure. So you have to post your assignment on a Sunday, do your responses to your fellow participants. Your facilitator responds to you. You have to post a journal. So you have a rather busy study week. A good institution like the University of British Columbia will give you a very clear idea of how many hours a week that will take. So that's an asynchronous learning environment. You're not online ever. I'm never teaching in Zoom on an asynchronous platform. I do that with other forms of learning, but not this one. Now, synchronous is what we talk about. We're talking about brick and mortar. We're talking about real-time learning. Synchronous learning can roughly be also Zoom instruction, but that would assume that the whole course has been developed for that medium, and it hasn't. Most synchronous learning that takes place right now is remote learning using materials that haven't been adapted for the online environment. And as I say, I'm just so proud of all of my colleagues worldwide who are doing this. It's a thankless job. There's a great deal involved in curriculum design for online. If a student has a question of the instructor, there are several ways to manage it. There is an inbox kind of function within most platforms. They can just send me an email. That's easy. I do ask students, participants, as we call them at UBC, to post their questions online, because most of their fellow participants probably have the same question. There really are no bad questions, and it's amazing how many people have the same one. So that, and of course, I'm online every day, and I will respond as quickly as possible. But there is always that shortcut. If people are really having a hard time understanding a concept or something, they email me, and I get back to them really quickly. The entire process of asynchronous learning forms a small online community for the duration of that course. Now, as we do in the Certificate for Intercultural Studies and other certificate courses at the University of BC, there will be 4 to 6 courses necessary for the certificate. So you'll find that participants know each other rather well by the end of this. They have a tremendous network together. Even if perhaps they may never meet physically, I encourage them absolutely to join on LinkedIn or other platforms. Even they've formed small study groups going forward through LinkedIn and other areas. So the networking possibilities I have, in my experience with online education, the networking is absolutely not less than it would be in a real-time classroom. And because all voices are heard sort of at the same volume, if I can use a sort of really figurative example like that, everybody's voice is the same. Your written voice, what you're posting online, there's no better or worse. There's no one who dominates it. It's a fabulous experience, really. Extroverts tend to listen to respond. People are extroverted for a wide variety of reasons. There are lots of psychometric tools to assess how extroverted or introverted you might be, but generally speaking, an extrovert will be the person who stimulates or starts the conversation, as opposed to the extrovert. So when you're listening to respond, you're not listening to hear or understand. And if you're reading, it's a very, very different process for digesting that information. When you're reading, you must be listening to understand. Of course, in a learning environment, you're also reading to respond, but then you must have a deep understanding. And where this the intersection between extroverts and introverts is, the extrovert finally must hear what the introvert has to say, and the introvert doesn't tune out the extrovert's 15th comment as soon as the mouth is opened. Both benefit equally. An inclusive environment includes all. Bottom line, it means that others' voices aren't heard. And in the online environment, everybody's voice is of equal value. Everyone can be heard. In thinking of, what skills should extroverts master? What should they learn? I think that an online learning experience would give them life skills that cannot be replicated otherwise. Because my field's organizational behavior, and we focus a lot on inclusive working behaviors, we take in the courses that I teach, that I facilitate, we focus a lot on active learning. I mean, these skills, you can Google it, you can learn it, but people don't actually retain things they don't feel, and so if you want to make it a life skill you can compound, you can build on, you really have to put yourself in an environment where you're going to get the message. And sadly, a lot of extroverted people go through life feeling terribly misunderstood, and they are, as we all are. No one is being received and perceived as the person they are. We're being received and perceived as what someone else thinks we represent. And of course, since that is just neuroscience, we are going to have to accept that we need other platforms and ways to develop ourselves more, to enhance the innovation and creativity that is inherent in all of us. The courses that I teach are, I just finished doing for the University of British Columbia, And there are many, many, many. I really advise anyone to go onto the extended learning platform at the University of British Columbia and just have a look. My business is not to drum up business for UBC, not at all. I'm an academic, and yet their continual revision and revisiting and upgrading of their materials and curriculum is second to none. So I do adore that. So I just finished teaching Transforming Intercultural Conflict, which focuses on negotiation and of course, personal mastery of yourself and the kind of things that you have to learn to be effective in this intercultural environment. Engaging organizations in diversity and inclusion is another of my very favorite courses that I facilitate. It's very extensive. Anyone who wants to know more about creating inclusive environments, or who has been tasked with that role in their organization, please do look at this. It is a fabulous way to approach rolling this out, and you will be in a group with people who are doing exactly what you're doing. There are foundations of intercultural communication. These are all through the Certificate in Intercultural Studies, or else the Certificate in Diversity and Inclusion. There are many, many options there. So I would recommend that anyone listening to this, if this sounds interesting, please do. So the kind of courses that I facilitate do lend themselves also to inclusion, because it really is literally what we teach. It certainly suits anyone who does not have the opportunity for tertiary education if they don't travel. That's just the very basis of the equity in this, is that people who don't have the money to go and live in pricey Vancouver, for instance, for 4 years, or even to do these courses. The courses that I facilitate are usually 6 to 8 weeks, but it's impossible for people. So that's number one. Number two is the ability to combine full-time working life with additional study. Third is these kind of online certificate courses are a kind of a power punch of learning. Very intense, very focused, and extremely well designed to reach the learning outcomes that are promised. There's no downside. Just a word on my own ability to assess curriculum development is I accredit courses in universities in the Netherlands and in Belgium. I am Dutch as well as Canadian. I speak fluent Dutch, of course, as well, and so I actually accredit universities on their courses. I know what I'm looking at with curriculum. I have designed for the online environment, and basically converting real-time credit to online credit is a very complex mathematical formula that is supervised very carefully by all the governments in the institutions I teach for. So it's not a less quality, it's not of less value. The other students you're with are the same kind of network. My students at UBC, one can be the Canadian ambassador to Peru. Another one can run the biggest hospital in Alberta, which has been very interesting in COVID times for sure. Another will be a career changer, someone who is a supply chain procurement specialist who wants to make the move to inclusion and equity, for instance. So there are any number of reasons why people are online, and it really suits them all. The benefits to the working professional who wants to add to their knowledge, who wants to learn, continue learning, and has other goals. The advantages of asynchronous learning are many. The idea that you can fit the study in around your other activities. You know, it's not that you have to stop everything and reschedule everything and plan everything. I mean, especially now, you could have two working professionals sharing a home together with several small children who are unable to attend school except online. It is a very challenging environment. So I've seen in particular in the last year, it has been like a soul bath to be online in an environment where no one can interrupt you, where you can just focus on that one thing just for a few hours. Usually it's only maybe a 10 to 15 hour a week requirement. So it's not huge, but it is something you can do at 9 at night for an hour. It is something you can do for 2 hours on a Saturday morning. You can fit in reading the articles you have to read anywhere. It is marvelously it's almost endlessly flexible. As I say, it's not self-paced learning because you have to meet milestones every week. It is a well-structured and designed course. You have to meet milestones. However, you can make it your own. I say this to everyone, if you haven't tried it yet, please do. I believe you will love it. So many more people love it than hate it over the years that I can say with all safety, I think that chances are that you will be sold for it for life. And I hope that in lifelong learning that online is a big part of it for people. I think one of the great advantages to online study at the moment is that it really helps to prepare you what the workplace expects from you. Out of that, this year has accelerated it beyond any imagining, but people are saying, yes, we're pretty much with remote work where we thought we'd be 5 years from now. Well, welcome to the reality, because that is exactly where we are. So the ability to laser focus and hone your writing skills in an online environment is also very key. People will be writing more than they are used to. I think there's been a bit of a move away from synchronous Zoom, real-time staring at each other in a camera, and I think that more people will move to asynchronous messaging type communication. But the skills that you'll acquire in an online learning environment, the tact you need, the care, the diplomacy, because everything written comes across much harder. It really does. And it's not like a throwaway comment. You can revisit that again and again. Of course, you get to edit online. This is not Twitter. If you write something you don't like, you just take it right off. It's fine. And again, you're only there with your cohort, with the people you're studying with. This isn't public. Nobody else can see what you're writing. It is a wonderful place to develop leadership skills for wherever your career takes you. Yeah, online can give a lot.